So Alabama had their spring game yesterday. They're going to have a squad this fall. They had so many guys missing yesterday, and yet if you would have tuned in with no context, you would have said, that looks like a national championship contender. Yeah, they are. And they're missing a lot of guys yesterday, too. Bryce Young, I think, showed everything that you would need to see from him to validate the expectation that he's going to be one of the top quarterbacks in America. Very early on in spring, you remember there were some whispers out there. There were some little pseudo headlines that didn't want to outright say it, but wanted to suggest so that you would interpret it as maybe Paul Tyson making a move there. Paul Tyson's not making a move. No one's making a move at quarterback at Alabama. It's Bryce Young's job. Barring injury, it will be his job. So I think anyone with a rational pair of eyeballs in their head saw that yesterday. Now we move on and we look around, and all of a sudden there are these other names, because it's a perfect situation for Bryce Young. And the perfect situation is he came in last year as a top quarterback in the country. But because Alabama was already set at quarterback, as it turns out, he didn't need to start last year. Ohio State's got this right now. Georgia's got it with Brock Vandagriff right now. LSU's got it with Nussmeier. North Carolina's got it with Drake May. You bring in high-level guys, but because you have adequate proper depth, they don't have to start immediately, and you're all the better for it once they finally do start. So now Bryce Young has an entire season under his belt. He's going to have an entire spring under his belt. When you watched him yesterday, when you listened to Herb Street and Galloway standing there with Nick Saban on the field yesterday, those guys, by the way, listen. When you mic Nick Saban up and you mic those guys up during spring games, listen, because they're sharing with you about as much insight from Nick Saban in that program as you're going to get anywhere, up to and including the season. And when they talked about him being in full control of the offense, there's nothing he doesn't know. Well, that's a product of having been on campus now for 2 spring periods, even though you didn't have spring last year, but he was there for 2 install periods. Nick Saban's gone out of his way to talk about Bill O'Brien being the new OC there. And if you follow Alabama, you've already heard him say this. When we interviewed him a couple of weeks ago, it was like a couple of months ago now, he said it to us. He said it again yesterday when asked, what are the differences going to be with Bill O'Brien coming in here? And he said, we didn't really change anything. We haven't changed anything offensively, because the way we look at it is we can either have the entire organization learn one man's scheme and way of doing things, or we can have a set, successful way of doing things, and we can bring one man in here and have him learn all of it. And that's the way he's doing it with his offensive coordinator named Bill O'Brien right now. So they got everything set the way that they'll need it to a quarterback. Bryce Young's not a finished product. You saw some mental errors yesterday, and that is spring. Even their most prolific offenses have looked terrible at times in spring. But get off quarterback, because quarterback's not even an issue for them or a question right now. What was a question, and to some extent still will be going into the season, is out of all these seem like infinite amounts of true freshman receivers coming in, which one's going to pop? And so far this spring, we had heard whispers about this name, that name, but we hadn't really heard one name step to the forefront. And then yesterday happened, and a G.A. Hall is a name that a lot of you have seen, but you have been very hesitant to try and pronounce because you don't normally see those combinations of letters put together very often. But when you look at what Jesse's showing you right now, you better learn to pronounce his name, because I haven't seen a name that I was more convinced I was going to have to learn since the name Tagovailoa came into Tuscaloosa. That's a superstar and will be as a true freshman. That's as plain as I can put it. When he started making plays in the spring game yesterday, they went and found Saban and said, who's 17? That's Waddle's number, right? But he's gone. Who is 17? Well, essentially, in not so many words, Saban said, that's a guy we're going to see a lot this year. And so he didn't really even mince it. He doesn't talk about early enrollees or freshmen or really any players like that, unless you're probably going to have a high likelihood of seeing him this fall. Really fluid, good route runner. He possesses all the characteristics of these other guys they've had through there. But then you start to pull up rolltide.com, pull up the roster. Oh, he's 6'3", is he? 6'3". I hadn't had one like that in a while there, at least that possesses that kind of skill set. So he's really good. But then I want to look past Hall, and I want to talk about JoJo Earle. Can't, because he wasn't playing yesterday. I want to talk about Christian Leary. Can't. Ja'Cory Brooks. Can't. John Mechie. Can't. I had someone text me and say, I don't know, man, like they had some guys who flashed here and there. I don't think their receiver room is going to be a strength for them this year. Alabama's going to have one of the best receiver units in the country. Anyone who wants to set up a side wager with me on that, feel free to reach out. I think they're going to be really improved defensively. I think Georgia and Alabama both yesterday showed really promising signs defensively of getting past a lot of what they struggled with defensively last year. Pass rush is going to be there for them, but it's not just one or two players. I think it's collectively Now, make no mistake, they got the star players, but I think it's a collective effort across the front. You didn't see Will Anderson yesterday, who is their best pass rusher. A name you did see is Chris Braswell, who was a 5-star in his own right, came in last year, kind of got buried, had some development to do. He had a strip and score yesterday, and so that name, LeBrian Ray, but I'm, for their sake, just as excited about their ability all along the interior of that defensive line to get pressure. Guys like Tim Smith, it's a name that you just kind of forget is there. DJ Dale's a name you kind of forget is there. And we've talked about these guys a lot, the collective unit that they have on the interior of that defensive line. I think they're going to be really good at pressuring the quarterback, which then lends itself to really assisting a lot of that defensive back depth that, again, you and I had talked about this past week leading up to this spring game, and then you see it on display yesterday. Josh Jobe is a name that you know is kind of a proven commodity. Jalen Armour-Davis is a guy they handed out a bunch of awards to afterwards for being one of the most improved players on that team. I thought he was really good at contesting balls in the air yesterday. There could have been several more big plays through the air, if not for him. And if you listen to the way Nick Saban was riding Kool-Aid, JaQuincy McKinstry, who wears number 1, let me get back to that in a second, very obvious that they expect him to contribute this year too. So saw a lot of good things from Alabama. They're going to be a bona fide national championship contender. Speaking of that number 1, before we move on, I just want to offer a little word of advice. Name, image, and likeness is a big thing on the forefront. Marketing is a really popular word right now. If you walk onto a college campus and the number 1 jersey is not already taken, grab it. I don't care how many stars you had next to your name. If number 1's available, grab it and run. JaQuincy McKinstry had the good sense to do that at Alabama. And one more, just a little programming note, a little piece of advice for anyone out there. Now, I know ESPN had their A-team in Tuscaloosa yesterday. They had Joe Test down there, had Kirk Herbstreit down there. If Nick Saban agrees to wear a live microphone for you during a broadcast, you might want to cut your verbalization down about 60-70% and just open the mic up. Have the dump button ready. Have a strong 7-second delay, but open the mic up. Because that is some of the best overall college football content that you will get all year, and you have it. You have it right there. He's not going to do that for anyone else. We don't get it in a game, but you get to see him mic'd up, live TV, standing right there on the field behind his offense and defense. He's got a guy standing there calling every defensive play for him. You're getting live feedback from him. He was mostly really good with the expletives yesterday, so it's viable. It's a viable TV product on a Saturday afternoon in the middle of the day. Just open him up and just let him go.